This is the Meetinghouse with Dwight A. Moody. News, reviews, commentary, and conversation on religion and American life. Now, here is Dr. Moody.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Meetinghouse for a very interesting conversation on religion in American life and education in American life and politics and American life, all of it today in the Meetinghouse. I am your host, coming to you from our studio in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Many of you remember that last week I was on the steps of the courthouse in Brunswick, Georgia, broadcasting about the trial of Ahmaud Arbery. I'll have a lot more to say about that throughout the show today, and my commentary is on that as well. We're coming to you, of course, over radio. Some of you are listening by radio from Brunswick, Georgia, St. Simon's Island, Georgia. Also broadcasting on the video network of St. Stephen's Live, that's St. Stephen's Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky, and of course also on the Meetinghouse Facebook page and also on my own personal Facebook page. My guest today is Lori Carrell, Dr. Lori Carrell, Chancellor at the University of Minnesota in Rochester, Minnesota, and author of a new book, Communicate for a Change. We're going to be talking to her about that in a few minutes, but as always, we've got the news brought to you by Perfecto Coffee of California. Order your coffee at perfectocoffeeinc.com. I'm going to be sending Dr. Carrell a package of this coffee straight to her office there in Rochester, Minnesota, as I do all of my guests. But first, the news in the world of religion, the world of, I guess, of American religion. We begin in Los Angeles. Jose Gomez, president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, spoke out strongly against social justice movements during a speech to a meeting of the Congress of Catholics in Public Life in Madrid, Spain. Gomez is Archbishop of Los Angeles. He described the contemporary social justice movements as pseudo-religions that ultimately serve as, quote, dangerous substitutes for true religion. He spoke also against the secularization of Western society and lambasted cancel culture, contending that often what is being canceled are the ideas, values, and practices of the Christian religion. These remarks mirror those of conservative Protestants who often contend that social justice emphases related to such things as climate change and racial reconciliation distort the true gospel. Of course, that's not what I think, and it makes me wonder what Pope Francis thinks about a speech like that. From Louisville, Kentucky, 2 seminaries in Kentucky have joined the growing list of companies and organizations going to court to push back against the presidential order requiring many employers to adhere to vaccination and testing protocols during the COVID pandemic. The Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, from which I hold 2 degrees, and Asbury Theological Seminary in Wilmore, where I began my theological education. They're 2 of the largest evangelical seminaries in the country, and they both have filed civil lawsuits in federal court. White evangelical churches, organizations, and institutions have been at the forefront of resistance to local, regional, and national protocols from public health officials. From Nashville, Tennessee, United Methodists have been on the verge of dividing or dissolving or imploding for several years, and we've been reporting on it consistently. But the postponement of their annual meeting due to the COVID has given opportunity for mediating influences to gather momentum. The annual conference for 2020, and 2021, which is a global meeting, both were canceled because of their international constituency. Many of their representatives come from places where COVID is a much more of a threat. It's feared now that their 2022 in-person conference will also be canceled, which means they cannot vote on the protocols that have already been proposed and established. In the meantime, though, a letter circulating among UMC leaders entitled A Call to Grace invokes Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1, and I quote, "For everything there is a season," end quote. And it reads, in part, "It is our intention to shift our focus from legislative solutions that are dependent upon a general conference to supporting strategies for a gracious exit that can be enacted at an annual conference, a central conference, and at jurisdictional levels. And we call upon bishops, conference leaders, and all United Methodists to join us in this effort," end quote. New York, and actually everywhere, around the world even, Hindus, Jains, Sikhs, and some Buddhists celebrated the Festival of Lights called Diwali for the 5 days, November 4 through 9. One of the most popular festivals rooted in Hinduism, Diwali symbolizes the spiritual victory of light over darkness, good over evil, and knowledge over ignorance. The festival is widely associated with Lakshmi, the goddess of prosperity, as well as many other regional traditions. Festival activities include, and this will sound very familiar to Christians, home decoration, shopping, fireworks, prayers, gifts, and food. Hinduism is the fourth most popular religion in America, trailing Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And finally, from Washington, D.C., hardly a week goes by that we don't have a story coming out of Washington. The National Cathedral, a congregation of the Episcopal Church of America, was filled to overflowing for the funeral of one of the most respected soldiers, statesmen, and citizens of the United States, Colin Powell. Although a wide range of people spoke, it was a thoroughly Christian funeral of the Episcopal kind, recognizing that Powell himself was a very active and committed Episcopal layman. A son of Jamaican immigrants, born in Harlem, raised in the Bronx, Powell discovered his life's mission in the Army and rose through the ranks to serve presidents of both parties. He became the first Black member of the military to serve as its top officer, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and also the first to serve as Secretary of State. It was what his son, Michael K. Powell, called a true American journey, a phrase drawn from the title of Mr. Powell's autobiography. Lead minister for the funeral was the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, the Reverend Michael Curry. Now here is Hadiza Jabril singing "Precious Lord, Take My Hand" at the funeral of General Powell in the National Cathedral. Ms. Jabril is a member of the U.S. Army Band and sings with the U.S. Army Voices. Let's take a listen.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me on. When my way
That was Adiza Jabril singing Precious Lord, Take My Hand at the funeral of Colin Powell in the National Cathedral, Washington, of last week. I've watched almost all of that service. I commend it to you. It's a very inspirational service for an inspirational life. And it's done good for the whole country. My guest today is a dear friend and an acclaimed administrator, Professor Dr. Lori Carrell, Chancellor of the University of Minnesota at Rochester. For many years, she was a professor of communication at the University of Wisconsin at Oshkosh, and that's when our paths crossed. I was launching and leading the Academy of Preachers and hosting festivals for young preachers around the country. Dr. Carrell was interested in all this. She has done a lot of professional research in sermons and how they communicate and if they communicate. And we got in touch, and now she's the chancellor of a great university and still engaged in matters of public rhetoric. With Robert Rimsky, a professor of education at the University of Pennsylvania, they have written and published a book entitled Communicate for a Change, Revitalizing Conversations for Higher Education. Dr. Carrell, you describe yourself in the very first paragraph. We are talkers who believe in conversation for its own sake. We want our conversation to promote change. I want to say you've described precisely my philosophy here in the Meetinghouse. So you're in the right place today to talk today about communication all over the country. Welcome to the Meetinghouse.
Dwight, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, before we get onto the book, let's talk just a little bit about the pandemic, why don't we? You write in the book about being quarantined with your daughter. Tell us about that, and tell us about the impact of the pandemic on your work and on the university in general.
Well, I think educators all over have had similar challenging struggle during this time. And really, we're talking about multiple disruptions. In addition to the pandemic, there has been so much challenge, certainly here in Minnesota, but across the country and the globe. So while we've adapted with technology to being distant, we are suffering in terms of social cohesion and rebuilding trusting relationships and doing that for an educational environment. So lots of challenge all over. I'm sure most of us have experienced.
Sure, the business world, and of course I am a pastor now in the church world, and there's just an awful lot of chatter and writing about ministers who are burnt out and ministers who are leaving because of the pressure that the pandemic has brought. Is there that kind of response in the education world?
I think there's a lot of speculation about what will happen. Some, of course, are referring to this period as the Great Resignation.
Right.
We're a mission-driven kind of organization, and people are drawn to this campus because of our innovation vision and the impact of radical care on students. And I'm hoping that vision and mission are so compelling that we continue, because we have really great people here. We want to keep them all.
Well, I understand that. And maybe this book is an effort to take your learnings and your perspective and make it a gift, not only to the educational world, but your focus on conversations as an avenue of transformation really appeals to everybody. It applies to everything. In your book, you apply it specifically to education. But as I read through your book, I thought, boy, I know a lot of preachers that need to read this.
Well, yeah, certainly human communication is absolutely powerful, and every spoken word has the potential for permanent impact. Keeping that in mind when we're conversing, I think, is an important principle.
Now, I want to start out by this. You describe in the book 9 conversations that need to happen. And I was struck by the number 9 because you join a pretty elite network of culture and history. Let me just run through some of this. Dante in the Inferno describes the 9 circles of hell. The Enneagram identifies 9 personality types. A baseball team has 9 players. The Supreme Court has 9 justices. A novena is a prayer that's prayed for 9 consecutive days. I wrote a little book called 9 Marks of a Good Sermon. And most important, John Prine, the late, great John Prine, in his song, When I Get to Heaven, says he's going to make a cocktail and smoke a cigarette that's 9 miles long. You're in good company. Where did the 9 come from? Or is that just random?
Well, I thought it was random until I heard your take on all of this. So we'll have to think more about the potential cosmic nature of the number of topics.
That's right.
That are being avoided.
You've been pulled into, as you say, a cosmic circle of some sort with the 9. Trouble in the Academy, Cultivating Community, Campus Governance, Isolation versus Collaboration, Faculty Reputations as the bad guy, Education and Money, Student Culture and Identity, Curriculum and Change. You know, having been a professor for a period and a trustee for a period, I recognize all of these.
Yes, I think the conversations we need to have will take courage. So it's not random small talk, though that can certainly build our connections and ultimately trusting relationships, but really to courageously face the evidence of how we're doing and what needs to happen next and what some of the barriers are. And sometimes those conversations are most challenging because of who is and is not in the room. And that inclusiveness to the conversation is also a key factor in how generative those conversations will be in producing action.
You know, your comment there about who's in the room and who's not in the room makes me think of the climate change conference that just happened and how our president spoke repeatedly about the people who were not there, that people who were really central to the global community making progress were not, by their own choice, not in the room. So I do think that is an important point. But talk to us, describe to us, as you do in the book, how these 9 conversations got started and why you included the people you did. I was very intrigued by this.
Well, the book approach was to illustrate that conversations are powerful. Mm-hmm. So the co-author and I, Bob Zemsky, have been having these conversations for years, and we come from different perspectives and we often disagree and try to work through things to get somewhere constructive. And we have conversations with others, and perhaps you would simply call them friends or colleagues. But from those conversations with people who have particular expertise or perspectives, other new ideas come to generate new action. So we were trying to illustrate how this network of powerful human communication in our setting, but true in all settings, can produce new ideas and bring about change that is lasting. So the book is written as a conversation between the two of us. And then for each of the 9 topics, we bring in others to share their perspectives, specifically because we knew those perspectives were different than our own.
Now, just as a logistic thing, were these conversations face-to-face or were these conversations through an email?
Well, like just about everything else, our process was pandemic interrupted. So they began as face-to-face conversations with Bob traveling here to Rochester. And that was just before things changed in March of 2020. And so then the conversations continued through Zoom, through Google Docs as a helpmate to the verbal conversations as well.
So some of these were transcribed from actual oral conversations, and some of them were edited from written conversations. Am I right?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's right. So we had a method we called serve and volley. So one of us would start, and the other would respond, react, try to change direction, shift the conversation, or confront the thing we thought needed confronting with courage. And that continued back and forth throughout, whether we were able to do so in person or via Zoom, or if we were writing those interactions, which became necessary.
Yes, and but I really liked the conversational nature of this. It's the language is different when you're in conversation than when you're writing a text, your conversation partners in the book were very interesting to me, including your own daughter. I thought, knowing your daughter, I was just stunned when I saw her name and thrilled to read through. Wow, how articulate she is, I'll have to say. And I do want to talk about what she said in a minute, but I found these conversations very intriguing.
Well, so did I. And she was home during the pandemic, and we were having many conversations, and she was aware of the conversations that Bob and I and others were having to create the book. And we began to engage around the topic of the student perspective. And if we in the Academy really know our students, and that was riveting conversation, and mother-daughter talk often is, but I was delighted to include her in the conversation. We also wanted to illustrate that's where we start with those close to us, connected to us already, and then we move on to additional others. So you can see that the conversational style of the book, including the part with my daughter, is very different from most books where someone declares, right? And has some kind of answer that they are postulating and working to persuade us with. We're talking nonfiction. But here we're trying to illustrate that the new ideas and forward progress are going to come through the collective genius, not through any particular individual. So I am a better chancellor because I hear my daughter's voice and perspective as a young student and now graduate student. And that's the concept behind conversation.
Well, as a preacher, dealing with the slow erosion of support for an institutional church, I have dealt with this very issue as, for the last 20 years, I've been involved with young adults. Your daughter says this in the book: most of us don't know how to translate our passion for people and the earth, that is, for living differently as a result of our awareness, into careers. I just thought that was such a powerful statement, how to translate our passion into careers.
Yes, I think it's right on point.
It is, isn't it?
Something all of us in leadership roles in a variety of contexts, certainly in education and for you, the church, need to hear.
Well, it's not just translating it into careers, it's integrating it into institutions, because we in the church are having this conversation all the time. How do we attract these young adults who have a passion for people and the earth into an institution that too frequently has not had those passions? And we're suffering because of it. And I preached a sermon just 2 or 3 weeks ago about this issue, calling upon my congregation to listen to the young people, listen to what they have to say. quit trying to get them into our space. We need to go into their space. Very similar to what your whole approach is here, having conversation with people on their turf.
Well, Reverend Dr. Moody, may I say amen.
Amen.
To your sermon. And, I look to this generation, whatever their name shall be,
Right.
the generation coming of age during COVID, during the disruptions that have led to momentum around racial and social justice.
Mhm.
I look to them to bring constructive change to the world, and yet understand that it will be uncomfortable.
Yes, it will.
And that will be disruptive itself.
Disruptive is the word. It's going to be disruptive to your institution and to mine. It's already disruptive to business, as these young people buy everything online, and it is going to be disruptive. This is the hallmark of it, even without the pandemic.
That's right. And we need conversations that are courageous in order to make sense of things, the sense-making task, but also then there's the action-taking task to follow the sense-making. And conversation will see us through all of that if we have inclusive conversations and we approach the topics that we tend to avoid, and we get out of protection mode into listening and action mode.
Yes, this is exactly what churches need to hear. But you've brought up the cultural divide. You write in your book, we have been dismayed by how sharp the cultural and political divides with our communities have become. So let me ask you, what can universities like yours bring to the national healing process, not only in the pandemic, but the political divide that has so gripped our nation?
Well, we must accept the assignment that you just gave. That is to be sure. A first and core function that we serve there is the development of human potential. So all of the students we have, young and otherwise aged, their development, their awareness of history, of current challenges, of design thinking to create solutions that do not exist now. Our development of our students is our number one priority and mechanism of influence on the broader culture. A specific example from our campus is the creation of structured communities in which there is diversity of culture, ethnicity, language, geography, and more, so that students experience how relationships are formed, how differences are bridged, and can take that into their futures. So I just would speak to our number one priority, and that is the development of the human potential we have and the intercultural competence of the students who are with us.
Well, you've mentioned two things here that we could do a whole program on each. One is these communities, these student communities of diversity. And I can only think how this strategy differs from the sorority fraternity system that exists on most university campuses, where the selection process is exactly the opposite. Let's find people like us and live together because we have similar interests. Do you have fraternities and sororities on your campus?
We do not. We're being hyper intentional about all that we are doing and have had the privilege to be a startup campus, right? So we started in 2009. There's much educational research to be brought to bear on educational practice. And while most campuses would have to go through a change management process to get from where they are to where the research would point us, we were able to start with a blank canvas using research and applying it to practice. And in this area of building community for the well-being, the thriving, the flourishing of all. We were able to do these structured living learning communities that privilege diversity in human relationships. And again, we think this will have a lasting impact on how our graduates are engaged in their communities.
Well, of course, when you set these things in motion, you're creating a culture and a tradition that in 30 or 40 years, if not sooner, we'll need to go through a different kind of transformation to meet the challenges, after our time.
Right. And I don't even think we have 30 or 40 years.
No,
I think the pace, the agility, it's accelerated and intensified. And so it's maybe 30 to 40 days or months until significant change needs to continue. And I just want to mention, too, that the forming of community and of culture happens through human connection. And what's necessary for that? Conversation.
Conversation is right at the core of it. But I can't help but think that rather than prioritizing diversity as the lasting good, that adaptation or change has to be the fundamental value, because as you're just saying here, who knows, in 10 years, 20 years, what challenges are going to force a creative campus like yours to adapt yet again.
Yes. Deep, courageous conversations that are inclusive across multiple kinds of differences are inherently transformative. So change will emanate from such conversations.
Give us an example of one of these student communities on your campus.
We have a community called Health Core. CORE is an acronym for Community of Respect and Empowerment.
Do you use that for all of these groups?
We do have a variety of groups we're piloting and working toward having all students in a living learning community within the next few years.
And you mean living, so that they're living in
living
eating.
in community. In addition to conversation, we find eating together to be an important part of building human connection.
I said in a sermon here just not too long ago, eating may be the most important thing that churches do together. And of course, what?
The health core students sign a covenant to care for one another for their entire college journey.
Wow.
To lead on issues of equity and justice for our campus, and to help one another academically, because it's going to take multicultural teams to bring solutions to all that ails us in health and education, and in your context of the church.
And how does this strategy, if you've had enough time to test this, impact student retention?
Oh, yes, our faculty here do their primary research on student learning and development. So we have the facts, we have the evidence and data, and GPA is higher for these students, retention is stronger, completing the degree within the 4 years is stronger, and placement afterwards into advanced study or career launch is solid. We see this as a practice that is really important to fueling student success.
And I assume that these relationships formed in these learning communities continue after their graduation.
That is how our alumni are calling back to us to say, yes, these connections are lasting. And while we're a young campus, I look forward to hearing about professionals who were in living learning communities here at UMR, who are now out there solving the grand health challenges of the 21st century.
Now, how do you teach these students these communication skills that you demonstrate in the book and talk about in the book, are these practices built into these learning communities, these living communities that you created?
One of the ways that we are teaching these kinds of concepts goes beyond the living learning community to all students. We use a tool called the Intercultural Development Inventory, and it is first a survey, and then a critical self-reflection, and then a conversation with a mentor, a staff member, or a faculty member. And there's a mutual sharing within that conversation about where we are in our understanding of ourselves culturally and our multiple identities, and where we are in relationship to cultures and identities that differ from our own. And that's for every student. It is a time-intensive process. And what we hear from faculty, staff who participate, as well as students, is that this is valuable. We do this at 3 points: at the beginning of the college career, in the middle, and as they near graduation, so that awareness of their growth and practice of these skills is taking place.
I want to ask you or comment about the cross-cultural element on it. I know our country is more culturally and ethnically diverse than ever before. What are the demographics of your student body?
We are a diverse campus community, and for this I am very grateful. I learn from our students every day. We are 70% underrepresented, and what that means is that there are 3 categories of demographics that are historically underrepresented in higher education, and those include students of color, and we are 42% students of color. They also include first generation students and those from low income families, so low that they qualify for the Pell Grant. So under $50,000 a year for the family. And we have the extraordinary privilege of having 70% of our students in one or more of those underrepresented categories. It gives us a context in which communicating across difference is a daily practice, and that makes us all better people.
I was a faculty member at a liberal arts college that did not have that kind of diversity, and I was constantly advocating these things. Number one, that every student that enrolled come to campus with a passport, and that everybody who graduated had a visa stamped in the passport. This was our strategy of getting our students overseas into a diverse, an experience of diversity. But what you're describing is the world really coming to your campus, isn't it?
It is indeed. And I'm a great advocate of learning abroad as well. Simultaneously, we want to notice that we have diversity available in the next neighborhood over, wherever we are.
Wherever we are.
And, you know, one of the great divides currently is rural and urban.
It is.
And I'm so pleased that our campus, for those from Minnesota, half are urban, Twin Cities, and half are rural. And that in and of itself is a difference and is affecting all kinds of perceptions and is influencing many divides in our country. So having the conversation across the rural and urban and truly listening and seeking to ascertain the perspective of the other as real, not right or wrong, but real is critical.
You have been in a fascinating and very influential position, first as provost, well, first as professor and then as provost, and now as chancellor there at the university. But I want to ask you, over your career, both as a person and a professional, and I ask this as a pastor, of course, what spiritual disciplines have been central to your sense of self and to your success as a leader and as an educator?
Well, you won't be surprised to hear me say that seeking out conversation with those I don't understand has been a soul feeder. And that creativity is really a core place of fuel for me, whether that's writing or speaking or listening or generating ideas. I'm a question asker, a curious person. I want to be creative. So anything creative, I see as a spiritual discipline, as you're describing it, and also need to share my love of the planet. I love to kayak and feel the stillness and be just aware of how I'm a part of the natural world, and that also is soul feeding.
I want to tell you, Lori, that I've had a lot of conversations with people about spiritual disciplines, but I can't remember anybody identifying, certainly at the top of the list, human conversation as a spiritual discipline. I want to thank you for that. And then I want to, and if you're interested in kayaking and outdoors things, I want to invite you to North Carolina, where we have a lot of hiking and a lot of kayaking and of everything in between.
Well, thank you for that. You have some calm water because, yeah,
I'm
courageous in conversation, but not so much in, rapids.
I hear you. I hear you. Lori, thank you for being in the Meetinghouse today. Thank you for your book, your leadership, your example, your creativity. Thank you for your conversation today with me and with all the people around you. God bless you in your work.
Thank you so much, Dwight. I've enjoyed talking with you today.
Let's do it again soon, okay?
Indeed.
I'll be back in a minute. This is Dwight Moody in the Meetinghouse, where we have conversation on religion and American life. I have a commentary entitled, They Lit the Fuse. I'll be back. They lit the fuse. On Sunday afternoon, February 23, 2020, more than a year and a half ago, 3 white men using 2 pickup trucks tracked down a young black man out for a Sunday afternoon exercise run. They suspected him without cause or evidence of thievery in their neighborhood. After clumsily cornering him between the trucks, they confronted him with a loaded rifle, intending to make, they say now, a citizen's arrest. He feared for his life, grabbed the rifle for what must have been a desperate act of self-defense. The armed vigilante pulled the trigger 3 times, killed Ahmaud Arbery in the middle of the street. A week later, not yet knowing the fuse had been lit, just a few miles away, I inaugurated this radio program. First on the radio, 2 Rejoice radio channels, 97.5 FM in Brunswick, 94.7 FM on St. Simon's Island, both on the southeast coast of Georgia, the Golden Isles, I often call it. It was weeks before we knew about the killing, as prosecutors and police neglected to take any action. That dereliction of duty would, 9 months later, cost the district attorney her job at the polls, and another 9 months would bring her arrest on charges of negligence. She's free on $10,000 bond right now, awaiting trial. 10 days after I launched my radio show and before the killing of Ahmaud Arbery became a regular conversation on the broadcast, police in Louisville busted into the home of Breonna Taylor, thinking it was linked in some way to a drug deal. In the confrontation, Breonna was killed.